rustling paper. Thanks for having us. This is, for many of you may recognise, this is, I realised at the start of the conference just now that actually the idea of Brando is to bring the lead designer and a client together to discuss the project they've been working on, and this is the lead designer, who is Richard Turley, for those of you who don't know him, but for today we'll call him Dick, because he promised that he would be here for this conference. And he isn't here, so that's his punishment. Oh, next, come on. Are we aiming it at something? I don't seem to be going. There we go. And this is our client, an amazing client, Ellie Torrey, who also apologises that she cannot be here because she has an insane schedule. It's a very, very small marketing team at Formula One. In fact, there was hardly one in existence before Liberty Media took it over. So she apologises as she's flying around the world furiously as the start of the Grand Prix season is upon us. So instead, you have me, Tony Davidson, Executive Creative Director of Wieden Kennedy. You're going to be hearing from Trisha Comerford, who was the project director and who nothing would have happened if she hadn't been there. I can guarantee you that. And of course, Marc Rouault, the type designer. We'll hear more from them later. First of all, though, you might be, some of you, wondering who the hell are Wieden Kennedy and what are they doing on a stage at a branding conference. Wieden Kennedy are Dan Wieden and David Kennedy, and they were a couple of hippies who started an advertising company in 1982 in Portland, Oregon, of all places, somewhere where nobody in advertising wants to work. People, I think, know more about Dan because he carried on running the company, and he was the writer. What people don't know is David Kennedy was an amazing art director with a huge love of typography. And because of this, and the fact that their founding client, Phil Knight of Nike, didn't want any of his work to look like advertising. That was part of the cause that I think design became a key component to the way they thought from day one. And now there are 8 offices around the world, all who I think have a true love of design. It's now been so in the past 36 years, I think, fortunately and unfortunately, we've become known for making films.
This is what a Honda feels like.
I'm not getting on a cycle.
Hate something, change something.
Wiggle for me, then throw them oven mitts up in the air.
Reach for the Lurpak.
Life,
Dishes. Death. Dishes.
I don't even have a whole bike.
Renell, go!
I'm on a horse.
This is London.
And whilst it's fun to be, recognised for something, people pigeonhole you. And the truth is that we are a truly diverse creative company where design, technology are baked into everything we do. And to Alex's point, I think that's where the best creativity comes from, when you mix people who aren't all of the same ilk. So before we get into the Formula One project, I think you just need to understand the scale of this thing, which even I wasn't really. It's 500 million global audience, 1.8 billion cumulative views across 2016 season, 7 million total social media audience, and that's quite small because they haven't really been big on social media. 60 million people watch each race live, 21 races in key markets a year, 120 broadcast partners. This is where it gets really, really difficult, as Trish will tell you about. 21 promoters who have a lot of power. A lot of Formula One's business comes from the partnerships they do. Multiple sponsors and partners. And the logo, has to go with so many. I think it was over 1,500 partners' logos put against it already to date, just in the new build. Obviously, we all know you can't do anything without doing research. It was a very short timeline, so we did 3 key markets and dived into research. And yeah, there is a strategy. You have to kind of have something to aim everybody at when you've got something of this scale, which led to a brand book, which was us trying to get underneath of what is the purpose of new Formula One, because it had lost its way a bit. I think people feel that it's all about the engineering and not enough about the racing, overtaking, and the people. So I think, you know, we were trying to get to a provocative, we call it a North Star, which is like this, unleash the greatest racing spectacle on the planet. And everything has to go through that lens. So whether you're designing a typeface, you think about that, or whether you're thinking about, if I was inventing, you know, a new racetrack, how would you build it? You build it so there was more places for overtaking. So it's a single point that everybody can go through. I, like Alex, am not very good with words. I'm completely visually set up, and I go very emotionally and viscerally, because I believe most of the stuff that you really feel, including with typefaces, is about feeling. So I always sort of looked at Formula One and thought of it about as blood and oil. And the oil is like this incredible detail the engineers go to. I mean, it's the highest end of engineering that they're going to. And then the blood is this sort of crazy passion that people still are prepared to get into a car and risk their lives every time they do a race. And this, I think the passion of the blood was missing a bit from the mix. So that's often how I think of it and look at the, you know, try and get a feeling into the typography or the work. Before I hand over to Trish on the logo, I just wanted to give you a few things that came from the brief. So Formula One clearly wanted to signal a fresh change. You know, Carter Wong's previous logo is not an easy act to follow. It's been for 23 years, very successful, and they were very, very gracious about it. I really love that logo. I know Phil quite well. But it wasn't built with the digital age in mind. So a lot of it was not built for small, contemporary where we are. You know, Ellie's desire, the client, was to make more of a mark, because it had to go against so many other logos. Two logos do not look good together. So we were trying to build more of a shape, you know, more like the swoosh, but we still had to convey Formula One. Also, the logo was not ideal for fashion. I think fashion is a massive thing they're missing out on. And the lines on the old logo were really, really difficult to do in materials. Dick's desire was to have a very, very low slung shape, like the vehicles that we looked at. And I think there was something we found out from research, that people had this sort of retro feeling that they liked about Formula One. If you look back at a lot of the old sort of jackets and typefaces, there was this kind of feeling from the 70s and 80s, and we wanted to take a bit of that but try and contemporize it because we were going forwards. So that was where we sort of got to before we got to this. And now I'd like Trish to come up and talk to you a bit about how she dealt with the process of Richard and everybody trying to get through this in a very short space of time. Trish.
Hello. So my background is in branding and comms and marketing. I've never worked for an advertising agency before. I've worked with Pentagram and Interbrand and people like that and the partners. So that's my background. So working with an advertising agency is actually very interesting. Because the guys are really amazing. But as Tony says, everything comes off strategy and everything comes off design. And that's the starting point of this. So this is a big deal. When Wiedens call me, and they called me in May, and 2 days later they asked me to come back in, and they said, I think we need you for 2 weeks. And I said, I think it takes a little bit longer than that to produce an identity. Normally, you would be looking at maybe 12 to 15 or 18 months. I've worked in-house. I've worked at Rio Tinto. I was head of brand up there. And I've worked out-house. I've worked agency side for many, many years of my life. So this is a big deal because you're re-establishing a huge global identity. And we were asked, I remember I literally had just started, and Sean Bratches, who's the commercial director, said to me, Trish, can I have a logo by September? So that gave us 4 months to do it. So timing is also very, very important here. And I emailed back and I said, I think that's a bit challenging, but let's see what we can do. And I think we were 5 days out from what Sean asked us to do. So we started the process like I always start a process, and we started looking at inside and outside the identity and the world of Formula One, but also wider than that, because we were relaunching this as an entertainment brand, a media brand. And as Tony said, the world had changed. We needed to create a brand that worked online in all the different channels. So we looked at creating a fixed elements, which, back to what Jürgen was saying, the logo, the color palette, the typography, but there were elements that can flex around that. We looked at seasonal photography and other elements that can flex. So we're developing brand architecture. The first piece of brand architecture that I drew, I actually put in the bin because it didn't work. It's a complex business, Formula One, and we had to get under the skin of it before we understood it, basically. And as Tony said, there's an awful lot of people that work with Formula One. Promoters, there's 21 of them. There's 5 global sponsors. There's sponsors ad nauseum. There's the FIA. It's a really, really complex business. So I sat and thought about what we needed to do, and Richard and I were kind of working together to try and put together the team. So that's also a big thing. Also, what's the skill set, and who do we need when? So we've developed lots and lots of guidelines, and I'm still in the midst of guideline hell, I must admit. But one of the things that Richard, let's call him Dick at this point, talked about. In his brain, he absolutely had the mindset that we should start with a typeface for Formula One. And it would be because it's ownable, it's distinguishable, and it's recognizable. So no matter where you go, be it in Bahrain or Singapore, you will know you're in a Formula One area, and everything comes off that. You can turn it up and you can turn it down. And we cut many, many different typefaces. We cut 5 different typefaces that Marc will talk to you about. So we started with a competitor audit, and I'll just ring through this. We did a lot of due diligence. We looked at a lot of different stuff. We looked outside sport. We looked at TV. We looked at Coachella. We looked at entertainment brands. We looked at lots of different stuff. Where are they now versus where we want them to be? And we put them on an axis, as we do generally in branding. We avoided doing triangulars, upside down triangles and all of that. I've lived them many a time. And we started with development, concept development, and we were running at breakneck speed. We looked at lots of different concept identities. And then we agreed one route, and we knew it had to work right across all the different channels. That was the issue. And then we developed the typeface. So as Tony showed you, the symbol itself is an F and a 1 to all intensive purposes, but it comes from the low-slung car. That's where its heart is. And there are different sizes of it, of course, to work at all the different levels and all the different channels. And the system itself, back to Jürgen's point, the core elements are the color palette, the typography, and the logo itself. But on top of that, we add all the seasonal elements and everything on top of it. So this was Richard Dick's brain. He wanted to create 3 levels, ultimately, of typeface, which would turn up, you can turn up the volume and you can turn it down, depending on who you're speaking to. They're display typefaces, that's what they're to be used for. And if we look at the out-of-home and all the elements that Formula One actually develop and the promoters and sponsors develop, this would answer all of those questions. You can have those quiet moments, or you can turn it up and be visceral, basically. Now, we looked for typographers, type designers, and you're going to be shocked for me to say that we actually found Marc on the internet. And Richard is an amazing guy. He is an amazing brain. And he is a kind of a world... What I find about him is that he would email me and go, look at this guy, look at this guy. I had people working for us in Japan, in France, in Belgium, all over the world, basically. New York. So he found Marc on the internet, and we contacted him, and we'll talk to you more about that later. But now I'd like to introduce Marc.
Hi everyone. Sorry for my voice, I'm a bit sick because of, what's happening outside. So yeah, I will talk about the development of the typefaces. So yeah, well, it all started with this project, which is my graduation project from Type and Media in The Hague, which is a master diploma in type design. So I made this typeface, and that's the only thing of my work which is on the web. You can visit it and note the URL. It's there are all 12 projects. We are a class of 12 people, and there are 12 amazing projects there. So yeah, I produced those stuff. So yeah, you see the kind of the universe of the typeface already. It's very sports oriented or very powerful or whatever. So it comes very thin and condensed, very black and condensed, very wide and black, very wide and thin. And within all this, you can do many things. And besides of it, there was also the process book, which I printed out, and I just extracted some of the spreads that are very much already in this universe of cars and tires and Michelin races. This was all a lot of influential. Even I tried this ASCII illustration. This was more than 2 years ago. Just to say that this project was already very much into sports and all this kind of stuff. So it was funny that Timothy, the art director on the project, and Richard came to this project somehow, and they called me. And of course they worked on other stuff before I got in. So I also can show some of the early stages of the typefaces, but you can see that it was already kind of clear what they had in mind, like something very, very wide and very powerful, something very black too, that they put on situation. And then Luc asked me if he could use 3000, so this typeface I just showed. So he made his own custom version of it. So it was quite. So they proposed it to F1, but finally didn't make it on this state. But it was quite funny to see what he did with the typeface and to see it used like this. So you see that A coming already, and just putting it on some merch and stuff. So the style I was focusing is the black, because all the three others, the regular and the wide, were kind of very much set when I came into the project. But the black was on this state, so it was kind of a very bold version of the normal style, let's say. So they sent me a few kind of mood pictures and influence stuff from various universe. But so I put stuff on top from my kind of influences and more stuff that could just bring some ideas for the black. But this image, it's from Mimo Castellano, which is an Italian graphic designer from the 60s. So this one was very kind of the most powerful one, and it made me immediately think of Wim Krouwel, which is a Dutch designer. We made this crazy futuristic experimental typefaces. But this one is very crazy. Look at this W, for instance. It works as an alphabet, but then in a text it's kind of not so easy. So we took those two sources as kind of a starting point, and I tried some early versions out of this. Those very geometrical things. And then we tried just something a bit more, maybe more legible, and we could just check how it looks on text and so on. So it's funny that it's so almost conceptual, but within the context of a text, you can still read it. It's very. We are just used to read stuff, so even though the S or the H, many stuff are missing, but you can just guess what's there. So we just tried those crazy things, but we thought it was a bit too much, and also not bold or not black enough. So we tried just many variants around this, something a bit more rounded, but this was not technical enough or not powerful enough. So we just made it square, more square, and a bit bolder and square again, and to end with that one. So with all this very tight spacing and tight setting, I let you imagine what the fun it was to kern, because all the combinations have to have this very thin line in between. It works with two straight lines, but like G and R. But when you have DX or OX or whatever, it all has to. So it was a lot of fun, and a very short time. We also tried a very wide style for just mostly for the lockups to the logo for each race. So it was working in this case, but when you have the whole name of the race plus the sponsor and everything, it really got very too wide or too big. So we just dismissed that option. So now this is the state of the wide, the black. This is the bold, and there is a regular and italic out of this. And now we are working on finishing the broadcast versions, and then there will be there will be Arabic and Cyrillic and Greek and other languages, and maybe some Chinese and Japanese too. But it's on its way. So now we want to show you how it's gonna look in the next month, or yes, right? Yeah, the next Grand Prix is in Melbourne on end of March. So everything will be in use there. So yeah, exciting month or years or whatever. So those are all mock-ups, of course, but we all hope it's going to look like this. Yes, and we are waiting very much for this merchandising stuff, and TV and. Yeah. Someone to conclude?
So Ellie said, I thought it was an interesting point she made, and this is the wrong quote, just praises Wieden Kennedy. I think one of the things she talked about a lot, actually, was how difficult she had in other companies working with branding agencies, sometimes separate from the advertising agency. And she said, when you're trying to deal in a very short time frame, but also with something that complicated, trying to do, Steve Jobs you look at, and it was everything from product to, he was type obsessed, and he got that. And I think she said, it's so much easier when I don't have to deal with two separate partners, or that both partners are actually thinking about comms and branding all at the same time. So that was supposed to have been her quote. I think the learnings from all of this are clearly you need to have an amazing client, and normally it also helps if there's not very many of them, which was an advantage because we only really had 2 people to deal with, and then there was Jean Todt and the FIA who obviously had a say as well. I think what I just said before, joined up thinking, I would really encourage branding companies to be closer to ad agencies, or to, you can see the world that a lot of them are actually merging and joining up and buying each other up. Fortunately, Wieden Kennedy is a trust that can never be sold, because Dan believes that if you get sold, your soul of creativity goes. Just warning. Timing is important in classic sort of Wieden Kennedy chaos. We talked about the advantages of chaos. Well, there are some ones that aren't that advantage. We thought it would take a few weeks with Trish. Ended up, she's still with us. And the project was promised in a ridiculous timeline, which Trish has been trying to stretch, but we have managed to pull it off. But yeah, I would advise you to get somebody who understands timings. This is probably the most important point, I think. And Richard would vouch for this. I hadn't really worked closely with Richard before, but I love the way he is worldly wide and just is so curious about what's going on out there. And there are a lot of designers out there, super talented, who aren't signed up, who aren't booked or part of things. And if you're a young designer, I hope this is an example that you can be found if you put your work out there. And I encourage everybody to take more risks. It's really easy to pigeonhole and go, well, they did that, so I'll give them that. I hate being pigeonholed. I'd love somebody to come to me and give me an architectural problem, idea, rather than just, oh, you make ads, you can do that. So keep an eye out, look out there, because there's great talent out there. And finally, this one's for Dick. Don't promise to do a talk if you can't attend. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the open language you're using, and if whenever I'm looking for an agency, I would take Wieden Kennedy because you speak so frankly about Dick. Whenever we do brand talks, we always have clients on stage that say, or agencies that say, our client says, don't touch the logo. It's holy. We had it with Bundesliga. So the agency decided to make a step-by-step changes. We had it recently with Megaphone and Interbrand. Megaphone is a huge telecom company in Russia. How did you succeed in making such a huge step to change the icon that is an icon? It was an icon.
I think, to be fair, it's not us who made that call. I mean, Liberty Media, Chase, who bought Formula One for whatever it was, 8 billion or something ridiculous, and Sean, who was a former ESPN client of ours in New York. That's how we got the gig, and he came out of retirement to come and start this in London. They clearly wanted to make a statement of a change of design, and it upset a lot of people. We all know the reactions that go out there. It's like, I remember any logo of that scale and that sort of love, if you try and change it, you're going to get some comments. And the truth is, I don't think you can judge it until it's lived for a few years and lived through all its reiterations. But they definitely wanted to change it.
Okay. Bernie Ecclestone would never agree.
Bernie Ecclestone, no, wouldn't. I mean, Bernie got presumably paid out, and that was it. And it's a new regime, and they're American, owned, but they want to change it. And they said, it's not just the changing the logo. They want to change the racing. They want to make it more exciting again. They want to take Formula One into a new digital era. You know, so that's why I think
this is your first point.
Yeah.
You need an amazing client.